Elara was a widow. That was the first and last thing most people in the town of Prosperity knew about her. She lived in the small stone house her husband Elias had built with his own hands at the very edge of the valley, where the good soil thinned to gravel and the shadow of Redemption Peak fell first each afternoon. Her possessions were few: a sturdy oak table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a bed with a quilt her mother had made, and the horse, Jasper, who was more partner than property. She also had the journals. 27 leather-bound books filled with Elias's small, precise script. He had not been a man of many words, but he had been a man of immense observation. He wrote of the wind, the way it smelled before a rain, and the different metallic tang it carried before a snow. He noted the habits of the jays, the depth of the squirrels' nests, the thickness of the onion skins in their garden. For 30 years he had chronicled the life of the valley, and in the final journal, written in a weakening hand, he had written of the blight. He called it the black dew, a sickness in the soil that he believed ran in a 20-year cycle. He had seen it as a boy, a creeping rot that had turned his father's flourishing fields to a black, stinking mush in less than a week. He remembered the hunger that followed, the quiet, desperate winter. His calculations, cross-referencing rainfall, frost dates, and the slow fade of certain wildflowers, all pointed to this year, the year of the Blight's return. Before he died, he had held Elara's hand, his own as thin as a bundle of twigs. "Listen to the land, not to the men in the town hall," he had whispered. "Pride is a poor seasoning for an empty pot." So Elara began her work. The town of Prosperity was proud. It had a new town hall with a clock that chimed on the hour. It had a mercantile that sold goods from 100 miles away, brought in on the weekly train. It had Mayor Thompson, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his waistcoat. On the 1st of May, Elara went to see him. She stood before his large mahogany desk, her hands folded. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I intend to plant all my husband's fields in tomatoes this year. I will need to purchase a great many jars from the mercantile, 500 of them." The mayor leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. He looked at this thin, solitary woman. He saw her worn dress, the calluses on her hands. 500 jars? Elara, what could you possibly do with that many tomatoes? The cannery downriver pays a fair price. It's the modern way. "The cannery is too far, and I will not be selling," she replied. "I mean to preserve them myself." "Yourself?" He chuckled, a low rumble. "That's a fool's errand. The labor alone." "I am not afraid of labor," Elara said. He waved a dismissive hand. "And for what? A bit of sauce for the winter? We have the train. It brings supplies all year. No one in Prosperity will go hungry. This is an age of progress." She said nothing. She only watched him. "Use your husband's old method, I suppose," the mayor continued, a note of condescension in his voice. "The one with the brine and the wax seal? Elias was a good man, but he held on to the past." "His methods worked," she said. "His methods are dangerous," a new voice cut in. Dr. Finch stood in the doorway, his spectacles perched on his nose. He was a man of science and education, and he saw little of either in the old ways. "That much acidity, sealed that tightly with a non-mechanical lid. You're creating a pressure bomb, madam. One temperature change and they'll burst their jars. If you don't poison yourself with botulism first." Elara's gaze did not waver. "Elias's journals have the exact measurements. The brine neutralizes the pressure. The wax forms a perfect seal. Dr. Finch gave a short, sharp snort. The journals of a dirt watcher against established science? I think not. It is unhealthy. It is foolish. Take the mayor's advice. Sell your crop. Elara simply nodded. I will still need the jars. She left the office. The two men watched her go, a small, stubborn figure walking back toward the edge of town. The bursting widow, Mayor Thompson said with a laugh. Mark my words, by first frost she'll be cleaning tomato pulp off her cellar walls. The story spread through Prosperity like a summer flu. At the mercantile, women buying flour and sugar would whisper, Did you hear about Elara? 500 jars. My cousin's boy says her whole field is nothing but tomato stakes. It looks like a red army marching up the hill. Dr. Finch says they'll all explode. The name stuck. The bursting widow. Children would see her in town, guiding Jasper with his wagon full of supplies, and they would chant it under their breath. Men at the saloon would toast to her folly. It became a local saying. To attempt something with great effort and certain failure was to be canning tomatoes like Elara. The most vocal critic was Mr. Abernathy. He was the wealthiest rancher in the valley, a man who believed progress could be measured in steam and steel. That summer, he was completing his grandest project, a new smokehouse the size of a barn, with brick walls 2 feet thick and a complex system of steam-powered racks and vents. This, he would boom to anyone who would listen, gesturing to his monstrous building, is the future. It can cure 2,000 pounds of meat in a week. No spoilage, no guesswork. Scientific. Efficient. He would often ride his horse past Elara's property. He would see her in the fields, bent over her plants under the hot sun, and he would shake his head in theatrical pity. Look at that poor woman, he declared one afternoon at the mercantile, his voice loud enough for the whole store to hear. Breaking her back to fill glass bottles with poison that will only burst, while I am building a fortress of preservation, a testament to modern ingenuity. He saw her project as a personal insult to his own, her quiet, ancestral knowledge against his loud, expensive technology, her small jars against his cavernous smokehouse. He called her cellar the Red Tomb. The town laughed. They agreed. Mr. Abernathy's smokehouse was a symbol of their safety, their foresight, their prosperity. Elara's jars were a symbol of a backward, foolish past. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the Blight arrives. The work began. Before the sun crested the peak, Elara was in the fields. The soil was rocky near her home, and she worked it with a patience born of necessity. She turned the earth with a heavy fork, her shoulders straining. Jasper, hitched to a small plough, cut the long furrows, his hooves steady and sure. She did not plant in the conventional way, in long exposed rows. She followed the diagrams in Elias's journals, planting in clusters, interspersing the tomatoes with marigolds to ward off nematodes and basil to repel the hornworm. The town's farmers, with their neat monoculture fields, scoffed at her chaotic garden. The sun beat down through June and July. Her skin turned the color of baked earth. Her days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the soil. Wake, water, weed, rest. The plants grew, thick and vibrant. They climbed the stakes she had driven into the ground, their leaves a deep, healthy green. She moved among them, her hands gentle, tending to each one as an individual. She talked to them sometimes, quiet words of encouragement that the wind carried away. Jasper was her silent confidant. He would stand at the edge of the field for hours, whisking flies with his tail, watching her. In the evenings, she would brush his coat until it shone like polished copper, leaning her tired head against his warm flank. Her world shrank to the boundaries of her land, the rows of tomatoes, the cool stone of her house, the patient presence of her horse. The town and its mockery faded to a distant hum. In August, the fruit began to ripen. A blush of red appeared, then deepened to a rich crimson. The harvest began. It was a labor of staggering scale. Each morning she filled bushel after bushel. Her back ached. Her fingers were stained green and black. She loaded the heavy baskets onto a wooden sledge, and Jasper would drag it from the field to the house. Then the second part of the work started. Her kitchen became a steam-filled factory of one. The great iron stove was never cold. On it, a massive kettle bubbled, sterilizing the glass jars, their lids, the leather seals. The air was thick with the sharp, sweet smell of cooking tomatoes. She followed Elias's instructions to the letter. First, the tomatoes were blanched in boiling water, then plunged into an icy bath from the well. Their skins slipped off with a gentle touch. She cored them, quartered them, and packed them tightly into the hot, sterile jars. Then came the brine. This was the heart of the method. It was not just salt and water. The journal specified a precise amount of distilled vinegar, a single bay leaf, 3 peppercorns, and a sliver of horseradish root for each quart jar. Elias had written that this combination created an environment hostile to the bacteria Dr. Finch feared, while perfectly preserving the flavor and texture of the fruit. She poured the hot brine over the tomatoes, leaving exactly 1 inch of space at the top of the jar. She wiped the rims clean, placed the glass lid, and then the leather gasket, soaked in hot water to make it pliable. The final step was the most unusual. She did not use a mechanical clamp. Instead, she ladled molten beeswax over the top, coating the lid and the rim of the jar in a thick amber shell. As it cooled, it contracted, creating a powerful, airtight seal. Jar after jar. The process was repeated 100 times. 200. Her cellar was cool and dark. She had built the shelves herself, reinforcing them to hold the immense weight. She placed each finished jar onto the shelf, a small jewel of crimson and gold. The rows grew. 10 jars became 50. 50 became 100. The sheer tonnage was immense. 500 pounds of raw tomatoes, plus the weight of the glass, the brine, the wax. Her body was honed to a fine edge by the effort. All softness burned away, leaving only muscle and resolve. She worked through storms that rattled the windows and heat that warped the air. She ignored the riders who paused on the road to stare, to point, to laugh. Her focus was absolute. The jar in her hands, the recipe in the journal, the growing rose in the cellar. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people. By the last week of August, she was nearing the end. The shelves in the cellar were almost full. 480 jars stood in silent, orderly ranks. A vast library of summer, stored against the coming dark. The air began to change. It was a shift so subtle that no one else noticed. The townspeople, busy with their own harvests, their minds on market prices and the coming fall fair, felt nothing. But Elara felt it. The morning air lost its crispness. It felt heavy, damp, carrying a strange, metallic scent, like old copper. She recognized the description from the journals. She saw the signs in the world around her. The birds were gone. The usual chatter of sparrows and finches in the eaves of her house had fallen silent. The sky seemed empty. The insects vanished. The constant hum of bees in her marigolds ceased. The crickets did not chirp in the evenings. A profound, unnatural quiet settled over the land. One morning, she found a fine greyish film on the broad leaves of her squash plants. It was almost invisible, like a spider's web, but it did not feel like silk. It felt greasy, cold. Elias had called it the ghost's breath, the first visible sign of the blight spores. She knew she had only days. A new urgency entered her work. She harvested the last of the ripe tomatoes, leaving the green ones on the vine. There was no time for them. She worked late into the night, her kitchen lit by a single lantern, the rhythmic clink of glass on glass, the only sound. Jar number 499. Jar number 500. She sealed the last one as the sun rose on the 1st of September. Her work was done. She banked the fire in the stove and carried the final jar down into the cellar. She placed it at the end of the last row. 500 jars. A wall of preserved life. A bulwark against fate. She stood for a long moment in the cool, silent dark, the scent of earth and wax and vinegar filling her lungs. She ran a hand over the cool glass of a nearby jar. It was solid. It was real. She went back upstairs and looked out the window toward the town. A plume of smoke rose from the chimney of Mr. Abernathy's new smokehouse. They were busy, confident, oblivious. A thought, sharp and clear, pierced her exhaustion. She should warn them. She could walk to the town hall. She could stand before Mayor Thompson and Dr. Finch. She could tell them what Elias had written, what she saw in the air and the silence. She even took a few steps toward the door. Her hand rested on the latch. Then she remembered their faces. The mayor's condescending smile. The doctor's dismissive snort. She heard the echo of the children's chant, the saloon laughter. The bursting widow. They would not listen. They would call her mad. Her warning would be just another chapter in the town's amusing story about the crazy woman and her exploding tomatoes. Her warning would not save them. It would only feed their pride. She let her hand fall from the door. Her duty was to the wisdom Elias had left her. Her duty was to the work she had just completed. She could not save those who refused to see. She turned from the door and began her final preparations. She brought in extra wood for the stove. She drew fresh water from the well, filling every bucket she owned. She secured the shutters on the windows and bolted the heavy cellar door from the inside. She and Jasper would weather the storm alone. On September 3rd, the black dew arrived. It came with the morning mist, a creeping, silent tide that rolled down from the hills and settled in the valley. It was not a storm of wind and rain. It was a plague of stillness. The farmers of prosperity woke up and saw nothing amiss. But when the sun burned the mist away, they saw the truth. Every leaf on every tomato plant in the valley was speckled with black. At first, they thought it was a simple fungus, a nuisance. They sprayed their powders and their tonics, but it was no use. The blight was a thing of mythic violence. It worked with terrifying speed. The black spots grew, coalesced, until the leaves looked as if they had been scorched by fire. Then they withered, crumbled to black dust. The rot moved into the fruit. The firm red tomatoes, ready for harvest, softened. Their skins split, revealing a foul, watery blackness within. The smell began to rise from the fields, a sweet, sickly odour of decay that clung to the back of the throat. By September 5th, every tomato field in the valley was a wasteland, a graveyard of blackened, skeletal vines and dissolving fruit. Then it spread. The blight was not content with one crop. It jumped to the potato fields. The plants blackened and died overnight. When the farmers tried to dig the tubers, they came up from the earth as soft, leaking bags of putrescence. It took the squash, the beans, the corn. The entire harvest of the valley, the source of its wealth and its pride, was annihilated in 10 days. The conventional systems, the pillars of the town's confidence, crumbled to dust. The cannery downriver sent its wagons, but there was nothing to buy. The wagons returned empty. Mr. Abernathy's magnificent smokehouse stood cold and silent. The blight had passed into the fodder, and the cattle that ate it grew sick. Their meat was tainted. His fortress of preservation had nothing to preserve. Its great brick chimney released no smoke. It was a monument to uselessness. The mercantile's shelves began to empty. The weekly train, their lifeline to the outside world, was delayed by early snows in the high passes. Panic began to whisper in the streets. Inside her stone house, Elara was insulated from the despair. The sound of the world was a distant hum. The smell of the rot did not penetrate her sealed home. Her life continued in a serene rhythm. She had her stored food, her firewood, her water. She had Jasper in his warm stall. In the evenings, she would go down to the cellar. She would light a single candle and walk along the rows of jars. They glowed in the soft light, a 500-fold promise. Each one was perfectly sealed. Not a single one had burst. If Priplican has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Hit that hype button if you haven't already. By October, the hunger began. It was a quiet, creeping thing at first. Larders grew bare, meals became smaller. The town's collective bravado starved along with its people. The laughter was gone from the saloon. The mayor's waistcoat hung loose. The first snow fell, a thin white blanket over the black, dead fields. It was a beautiful and terrible sight. The first knock on her door came on a cold afternoon in late October. It was hesitant, soft. Elara opened the door to find Dr. Finch's wife, her face pale and pinched, a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She did not meet Elara's eyes. She stared at the ground. "My children," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They have nothing but thin broth. They are fading." Elara looked at the woman. She saw no triumph in her fear, no satisfaction in her humility. She saw only a mother's pain. Without a word, she turned and went to the cellar. She returned with 2 jars of tomatoes. She placed them gently into the woman's trembling hands. The doctor's wife finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "Why?" she stammered. "After all my husband said, after what we called you." "Hungry children should eat," Elara said simply. She closed the door. The woman's visit was like the breaking of a dam. The news spread through the starving town, not as gossip, but as a desperate prayer. They began to come. At first, they came at dusk, ashamed to be seen. A farmer and his wife, their faces gaunt. A blacksmith whose powerful arms had grown thin. They came, one by one, a procession of the humbled. To each, Elara gave what she could. 1 jar for a small family, 2 for a large one. She made no comment on their past mockery. She asked for no apology. Her welcome was unconditional, and her charity was silent. This, more than any words of reproach, was their punishment. They had to accept life from the woman they had condemned as a fool. Soon they were coming in the open, in broad daylight. A line formed at her door, a sombre queue of the proud, brought low. The entire town of Prosperity, seeking salvation from the bursting widow. Elara became their leader, not by choice, but by necessity. She showed them that her gift was not just food, but knowledge. She taught them how to make a soup from a single jar of tomatoes, extended with hot water and wild herbs that could feed a family for 2 days. She showed them which roots were still edible in the frozen ground, which barks could be boiled for a bitter, nourishing tea. She gave them the wisdom of Elias's journals, the wisdom they had scorned. The last to arrive were Mayor Thompson and Mr. Abernathy. They came together, 2 broken men, their faces etched with the shame of their failure. The mayor's fine suit was rumpled. The rancher's confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weary stoop. They stood before her door and did not knock. They simply waited, their heads bowed against the cold wind. Elara opened the door and looked at them. They were the architects of her ridicule, the chief voices in the chorus of scorn. Mr. Abernathy was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse rasp. "My smokehouse stands empty," he said, looking at his own feet. "A monument to my pride." "It is worthless." Mayor Thompson looked at her, his eyes full of a despair she had never seen. "The train is not coming," he said. "The passes are snowed in until spring. We were wrong. I was wrong." Elara looked past them, at the line of hungry townspeople waiting patiently behind them. She went to her cellar and returned with 3 jars. She gave 1 to the mayor and 2 to the rancher, for his family was larger. Their hands shook as they took them. "You were right," the mayor whispered. Elara simply nodded and closed the door. The winter was long and brutal, the worst in living memory. But the town survived. They survived on the 500 jars of tomatoes and the hard-won knowledge of the woman they had mocked. They survived on the wisdom of the man they had dismissed as an eccentric. When the spring thaw finally came, melting the snow from the dead fields, it was a different town that emerged into the sunlight. The pride had been scoured from them by hunger. They were quieter, more thoughtful. A town meeting was called. It was not held in the grand town hall, but in the open air, in the main square, so that everyone could attend. Elara was asked to sit in a chair at the front. She did not want to, but she understood it was necessary. Mayor Thompson, Dr. Finch, and Mr. Abernathy stood before the assembled town. It was the mayor who spoke first, his voice steady and clear, stripped of its usual bluster. "We have survived," he said. "We have survived because of the foresight of one person. A person we, and I most of all, ridiculed. We were arrogant. We put our faith in machines and timetables and our own cleverness. We stopped listening to the land. We stopped listening to wisdom." He turned to face Elara. "You were right," he said, his voice ringing through the square. "And we were wrong. We are sorry for our foolishness, and we are grateful for your grace." Then Dr. Finch stepped forward, clutching his hat in his hands. "My science," he said, "was incomplete. It did not account for the knowledge that comes from a lifetime of watching and listening. Your husband's methods were not primitive. They were precise. I called your work poison, but it was our only medicine. I was wrong. I am sorry." Finally, Mr. Abernathy spoke, his gaze fixed on the great, silent smokehouse visible on the hill. "I built a monument to pride," he said. "She built a foundation of survival. I ask her forgiveness, and the forgiveness of this town, for my arrogant folly." A silence fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to Elara. She rose from her chair. She looked at the faces before her, faces she had seen sneer, faces she had seen weep, faces she now saw filled with a new and fragile hope.
"My husband used to say that the land does not forgive," she said,
her voice carrying easily in the still air.
"It only teaches. It teaches that pride is a seed that bears no fruit. It teaches that preparation is a better shelter than a strong roof. The lesson was hard, but we have learned it." She paused, then added, "I will teach you how to plant for the coming year. I will teach you how to listen." That was all. She did not speak of forgiveness. She spoke of work. The transformation of prosperity began that day. Mr. Abernathy, true to his word, hired men to tear down his smokehouse, brick by brick. The materials were used to build a large community root cellar, dug into the hillside according to a design from Elias's journals. The farmers abandoned their vast, single-crop fields. Following Elara's instruction, they planted smaller, diverse gardens, mixing vegetables and herbs, creating a resilient web of life that could better withstand disease. The saying, "canning tomatoes like Elara," was reborn. It no longer meant to engage in a fool's errand. It came to mean acting with uncommon foresight, preparing with quiet wisdom when others were loud with confidence. It was the highest compliment one could pay a neighbor. When we silence those who warn us, we are not proving them wrong. We are only guaranteeing the harshness of the lesson we will have to learn on our own. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories that make you think. Has anyone ever punished you for telling a truth they weren't ready to hear? Let us know in the comments. Elara lived for another 30 years. She never remarried. She never moved from her small stone house at the edge of the valley. Her life did not change in its fundamentals. She remained a solitary woman, attuned to the rhythms of the land. But she was no longer an outcast. She was a sage. She never held any official position, but she was the town's undisputed heart. No new field was ploughed, no new building raised without her counsel. She taught the children how to read the clouds, how to identify edible plants, how to understand the language of the birds. She taught them the lessons from the 27 journals of Elias. Her cellar remained full, but now it was part of a network. Every family in prosperity learned her methods, and every autumn the shelves of the new community cellar were filled with jars of every color, a testament to their shared resilience. They never faced a hungry winter again. She died peacefully in her sleep one autumn morning, at the age of 87. The entire town turned out for her funeral. They did not bury her in the town cemetery. They laid her to rest on the hill behind her house, overlooking the fields she had once cultivated alone, the fields that now fed them all. They did not carve a fancy stone. Instead, they placed a simple bronze plaque on the heavy oak door of her cellar. The 500 jars from that fateful year had long been consumed, but the cellar itself had become a shrine. The plaque read, "Here lived Elara. She saw the truth in the earth, while we saw only the reflection of our pride. We were wrong. She was right."